Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a piece of history that's going to absolutely flip everything you thought you knew right on its head. So when you hear the name Cleopatra, what's the very first thing that pops into your mind? Well, if you're like most of us, you probably picture this highly seductive temptress, draped in gold, lounging on a throne. And honestly, it makes sense. We've been fed this exact image for decades through these massive Hollywood epics. Think Elizabeth Taylor or modern recreations. We're conditioned to see her as this mythical beauty whose ultimate weapon was just her charm. But what if I told you that this legendary Hollywood image is barely scratching the surface of the real story? So we have to ask, who was the real Cleopatra? Because the truth is, the image we have of her today, this dangerous seductress whose main historical claim to fame was, well, hooking up with Rome's heavy hitters, like Julius Caesar and Marc Antony, it isn't just an incomplete picture. It is literally ancient Roman propaganda. See, as Cleopatra went from being Julius Caesar's ally to public enemy number one in Rome, especially during wartime, the Romans deliberately crafted a fake narrative to destroy her legacy. They wanted the history books to remember her for alleged debauchery, completely erasing her actual, formidable capabilities. It's a massive plot twist, honestly. Just look at this stark contrast here between that Roman propaganda of a promiscuous seductress and the reality hidden away in medieval Arabic texts. When modern researchers finally took a deep dive into works by scholars like Yakut and Al-Bakr, they found a completely different person. These writers, they ignored her looks entirely. Instead, they praised her brain. They were writing about Cleopatra the philosopher, Cleopatra the chemist, and Cleopatra the early mathematician. So to really unpack this huge paradigm shift, we're going to look at 5 things: the Arabic scholars, toxicology, chemistry, medicine, and finally, her true legacy. Starting off with Section 1, the Arabic scholars. For centuries, the Western world was completely in the dark about her scientific mind. That is, until Egyptologist Okasha al-Dali uncovered this incredible treasure trove of medieval Arabic documents. Get this, these scholars actually had access to Cleopatra's first-hand original writings before they were tragically destroyed in the fire at the Library of Alexandria. I mean, just listen to what al-Masudi wrote way back around 8956. She was a sage, a philosopher, who elevated the ranks of scholars and enjoyed their company. She also wrote books on medicine, charms, and cosmetics, in addition to many other books ascribed to her which are known to those who practice medicine. It absolutely shatters the Roman myth, right? It proves her legitimate intellect and shows she was a powerhouse actively contributing to the scientific literature of her era. Moving on to Section 2, toxicology. And hey, fair warning here. Her experiments in this field definitely leaned heavily into the sinister side of things. Now, her obsession with playing around with poisons wasn't just some random morbid curiosity. It was actually driven by a very real, well-founded fear. She was terrified of eventually being captured, imprisoned, and executed by the Romans. Knowing how powerful her enemies were, she wanted to be prepared for the absolute worst-case scenario. To do that, she needed to understand exactly, and I mean exactly, how different toxins worked on the human body. But wow, her methods for gathering that data were downright brutal. She actively tested these lethal tinctures on unlucky subjects and slaves, meticulously writing down every single symptom and the exact timelines of their torturous deaths. And honestly, the most horrifying part? She actually presented these excruciating, fatal poison tests as casual dinner entertainment for her husband, Marc Antony, and their guests. Yeah, talk about giving a whole new, terrifying meaning to dinner theater. All right, Section 3, chemistry. Cleopatra had a massive talent for chemical reactions, and she actually used it once to prove a major point. She bet Marc Antony that she could host a single banquet costing 10 million sesterces. To put that into perspective, that was an absolutely astronomical, absurd fortune back then. Antony, who was so sure it was mathematically impossible to spend that much on one single meal, smugly took the bet. So the next evening, she hosts the banquet. Antony is just confidently enjoying the first course, totally thinking he had this bet in the bag. But here is how she used practical chemistry to pull off the win. During the second course, she tells a servant to bring her a simple glass of vinegar. Then, she takes off this incredibly rare, priceless pearl earring, which was worth 10 million sesterces, all by itself, and just drops it straight into the glass. She waits for about 3 minutes for the chemical reaction to do its thing. And what happens? The pearl reacts with the vinegar, completely neutralizing its harsh acid. Then, she casually picks up the glass and drinks the dissolved pearl. The Roman senator Lucius Blancus, who was judging the whole wager, instantly declared Cleopatra the winner. She literally used chemistry to outsmart Rome's greatest general. Incredible! Let's jump to Section 4, Medicine. So while she clearly used science for some pretty dark entertainment and high-stakes wagers, she also developed highly practical, though admittedly sometimes totally bizarre, medical treatments. Take her famous cure for balding, for example. It involved whipping together deer marrow, bear's grease, reed bark, burnt mice, horse's teeth, rags, and, just a little bit of honey to hold the whole messy concoction together. You were supposed to apply this wild salve to your head and just wait. I mean, we can only joke about how long it would actually take for luscious locks to magically sprout after rubbing burnt mice and horse teeth on your scalp, but hey, the woman was experimenting. But aside from the burnt mice, she had some absolute medical triumphs. We've always looked at her iconic, thick black eyeliner strictly as cosmetic beauty, right? Well, modern researchers now know that this makeup contained specific, negligible levels of lead, and what that did was actively stimulate the production of nitric oxide in the skin, which literally protected her against bacterial eye infections. So what we all thought was just a slick beauty routine was actually preventative medicine, which she carefully recorded in her own cosmetic books, a real game changer. And that brings us to Section 5, her true legacy. This really brings her whole story full circle back to her toxicological expertise. The famous myth we all know is that, facing Roman capture, Cleopatra died this highly dramatic death from the bite of a poisonous snake, an asp. But scholars who actually understand her scientific background have a completely different theory. Because she was so deeply terrified of being paraded through Rome as a prisoner, experts now believe she used her chemistry skills to invent an early painkiller. This was meant to dull the agonizing effects of a self-administered lethal cocktail of opium and hemlock. She didn't rely on some random snake, she relied on her own scientific genius to control her ultimate fate. All of this leaves us with a pretty powerful, thought-provoking question. How many other female historical figures have had their real intellectual legacies completely erased by the propaganda of their enemies? We all blindly accepted the Roman storyline for 2,000 years, entirely missing the brilliant philosopher, chemist, and medical pioneer hidden just beneath the surface. I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to maybe look a little deeper into the history books we take for granted. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time.